Dr. Matt Holland graduated from Drake University's School of Journalism and Mass Communication in 2007 with a BA in radio and television journalism, and worked as a freelance television producer for various media outlets in Chicago and New York City, including Big Ten Network, Major League Baseball Network, and the Chicago Bears. Because his work focused largely on sports and was highly seasonal, he picked up side jobs working with animals on off seasons, which inspired him to eventually pursue a career in veterinary medicine. Dr. Holland then went on to Northwestern University, where he attended a post-baccalaureate program specifically designed for those seeking a second career as a doctor. He worked during the day and went to school on nights and weekends. After completing the necessary prerequisites, Dr. Holland was accepted to the University of Illinois College of Veterinary Medicine, where he served as president of the Student American Veterinary Medical Association. When he began vet school, Dr. Holland originally envisioned himself as a large animal veterinarian, but a course on public health and policy changed his mind when he learned of the critically important role veterinarians can play in helping to infuse public policy with science. Dr. Holland recognized how his past professional experience in journalism and communications, combined with his DVM degree, could enable him to contribute to building the desperately needed bridges between scientists and politicians. During his fourth year of veterinary school, Dr. Holland was accepted to the American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellowship Program, where he is currently serving a one-year term in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Matt Holland. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
So it's what's the weather like there in Washington, D.C.?
So today we actually have a high of 64.
You're kidding.
I'm not. I heard a word for this recently, for the feeling of being happy that it's so warm when it's not supposed to be, but also being sad about it at the same time.
And what's that word?
No, I don't, I don't remember.
Oh, you don't remember the word.
But I'm feeling it. I'm feeling both pleasantly surprised that I can take a walk outside with a windbreaker, and also wondering how to, as a good segue into what I do for a living now, wondering how I can convince some members of Congress to maybe be a bit more proactive about the warming situation.
About climate change and global warming, yeah. So before we get all into that, because there's so much I want to ask you about what you're doing now with your fellowship program, I want to make sure that we cover everything chronologically because I don't want to miss anything. Now, you began as a communications major, and you did freelance television production in Chicago and New York, you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me just a little bit about that.
So I wanted to be a professional baseball player, and then realized that wasn't going to happen. So I wanted to be involved in sports somehow professionally. So I went to Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa for undergraduate. And I should say I grew up just outside Chicago. Although I guess the bio says that. So maybe we can edit that out.
No, it didn't. I was actually going to ask you where you grew up.
Oh, yeah. So I grew up just outside Chicago, a town called Libertyville, pretty close to the Wisconsin border, about 25, 30 miles north of Chicago. Went to Des Moines, Iowa, to Drake University for undergrad, and majored in radio, TV journalism, and then moved back to Chicago and worked at the Big Ten Network. I kind of just got lucky, right place, right time. The network was just launching, so they were hiring lots of people, and I was appealing because they didn't have to pay me a whole lot since I just graduated. And it was a freelance job too. And so after the basketball season was over, the college basketball season was over, I needed income. So I went to Craigslist and found a job as a dog walker, and I loved it. And when the next college football season rolled back around, I went back to work at the Big Ten Network, but I was like daydreaming about working with animals and like figuring out how I could do more of that. And the next off season, I got a job at a shelter. And then I mentioned I moved to New York because there was this crossroads where I was kind of getting the feeling where television production wasn't going to be a forever thing, but I wanted to give it one more chance to see maybe I was in the wrong city or working at the wrong place, like just to try to switch it up. Because I knew a career change was going to be like a major commitment. So moved to New York, worked at the MLB network when they were just launching again, just got lucky. And came back to Chicago after that baseball season, and at that point decided to spend my free time and money on preparing to apply to veterinary school. So I was living in Chicago, working full time during the day, and then I went to Northwestern in Evanston. At night and on the weekends, they have a post baccalaureate pre-med program,
Right.
and most of the students in that program go to med school, human med school, but it's the same coursework. So so did that. That took a couple years, and then applied to Illinois, and just graduated last May, less than a year
Wow.
ago.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's quite a turnaround though. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big change in direction because I too started out as a communications major, and I never thought science was all that interesting, and I certainly didn't think I was smart enough to become a veterinarian.
Yeah, I didn't think that either. I distinctly remember at Drake in undergrad, some of my friends, the Drake has a good pharmacy program, and some of my friends would come back from class complaining about organic chemistry. And I just like those two words were always scary to me on remembering accounts from my friends. And then when I realized that I had to do that to get to where I wanted to be, I was like, karma, of course.
But yeah, I mean, you did, and did you get in on your first try to
Yeah.
University of Illinois?
Illinois, yeah. I mean, I think it helped that I was like a non-traditional candidate, because my grades were like 3.1, 3.2.
Wow.
Not terrible, but definitely not, not on the top of anybody's list of applications.
Right, right. Well, I know that a lot of people are talking about how veterinarians need to have better communication skills. The stuff that they don't have time to teach us in vet school. So I think that a lot of admissions committees are looking for some experience that demonstrates that you've got communication skills, and I mean, you've got a communications degree.
I
And,
I I agree with that, in terms of what I've seen and heard from admissions committees, and it's important. I remember when I was making the decision to switch careers, I was kind of frustrated with myself for uh, so much time and money you put into this degree and career that it turns out I'm no longer interested in continuing. And now I look back on it and see just how valuable it was to have experienced so much of the world in general, before attempting earning a DVM. I mean, it's a really challenging feat.
yeah, absolutely. I think, getting a degree in the humanities first, sort of revs you up, and then your like real life work experience, and you were working as a freelancer, so you were having to manage your own career,
Mhm.
and that's another skill that I think vet schools would be impressed with, because I think that we're also talking about more needing more veterinarians to think entrepreneurially and to consider starting their own businesses. I mean, that's really the road to well, if not wealth, at least financial stability, right? Is owning your own business as a veterinarian. Although
Yeah,
very few people are interested in doing that these days. It seems like new graduates aren't that interested, but
and how to have several clients and manage a schedule like that. I mean, I actually don't recall how much I played that up during the application process. But yeah, I mean, I had to fill out my taxes were a nightmare every year because of how many different pay stubs from different employers I had.
right.
But yeah, that's definitely a skill that maybe I should have talked about more. And for the audience and the target audience here is people that are looking to get in. Yeah. So anything that you can think of, if you have been a dog walker, think about how that translates.
Yeah. And
It,
then
not
was
just
University of Illinois, so that was in state for you.
yes. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, that's great. And then was that the only school that you applied to?
No, I applied to Ross. and I think UC Davis. So I have a twin sister who lives out in Oakland, and I applied to UC Davis mostly just because she was out there. I don't even know if I could have like accepted um, if I got in, just because of how expensive out of state is.
Right.
And if it was the only one I got into, I would have considered it. But I also was just playing the numbers game, thinking it was most likely, if I only got into one, it would probably be Illinois, because it's in state. So that was kind of what I was thinking the whole time.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're lucky now to have gone to an in-state school now that you're out in the world and working and having to pay bills.
Yeah, yeah. Very fortunate to have gone to an in-state school. I remember um, when I was shadowing before applying to school, somebody gave me the advice that the best vet school. I said, like, what's the best vet school? And they said the one you get into. And I now, I mean, I would probably supplement that advice with an asterisk and like in state, if at all possible.
Right.
Uh,
The one that costs the least.
yeah, because I mean, they are all there are so few in the first place, and they're all such high quality that if you can get in state, or like if your state has an agreement with a school in another state, um, it's it would take an unusual set of circumstances where the least expensive option wasn't the best option.
Wasn't the best option. Absolutely.
It's not
And so,
always, but yeah.
tell me, what did you think of veterinary school? I'm sure it was very different from your first degree, but was
Yeah,
was it a rude awakening? Was it exciting? How'd it go?
all of the above. Yeah, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Um, it it I'm glad I did it. I definitely I look back on it as as an accomplishment, um, and something I'm proud of. And it also, I mean, I learned more about myself, I think, than like being a DVM.
What did
Um,
you learn about yourself in
oh,
veterinary?
definitely mental health challenges. I had no experience with that prior to veterinary school. Fortunately, I mean, that's nice to be able to say that. At like 25 or 26 years old, that's never been uh, that's never been like a major concern, but it definitely was during school.
Interesting. So I know that, a lot of people who go into vet school, they do have, a history of depression or anxiety or something like that. And it
Hmm.
seems like it's just becoming more common in the general population, but especially in perfectionist, type A, overachieving, driven people. But
Yeah,
you had none of that. And then what happened in vet school that caused you to have to face that kind of challenge?
yeah, I thought about that a lot. So part of the reason I decided to switch careers in the first place is because I wasn't feeling very fulfilled by television production. Um, I remember thinking and saying that working in television felt like existing, and working with animals felt like living. And I wanted more of that. Like I wanted to be fulfilled at the end of the day and excited to wake up at the beginning of the day. And I wasn't really having much of that. And so when I got to vet school, I started having that. Like I was really excited to not only start to be enrolled in the courses that would one day um, lead to the degree I was seeking, but also to be around people who cared as much about these topics too, and like these clubs, like the public health club or the regulatory medicine club, and to see so much energy around a place that I also wanted to give energy. It was great, and it did feel like finally fulfilling, uh, and like I wanted to give a lot of time to that area. But I just like I had never had experience with burnout or anything, and so of course I burnt out on like signing up for too many things and saying yes, and and studying too much, and like all of it, just the whole fire hose all at once. So it's not surprising at all that like I don't think it's as much of like vet school did this to me. Like I think everybody is probably on some level capable of burning out, and it's just vet school is the first thing that really exposed me to learning that about myself.
Okay. So you overdid it.
Yeah.
You pushed yourself too hard and
Yeah.
got burned out. And what did it feel like? And what was that, like second year that you got burned out, or first year? And what did it feel like exactly?
I mean, I think it actually, I know I'm doing like a bit of self-diagnosing. So, I'm not an expert in this area. I'm just, I guess, more just reflecting. I think it happened pretty immediately. At least the process and habits did, because I remember, like we had quizzes right off the bat and I wasn't doing well. And so I decided to do a little bit, like exercise a little bit less, or, like not call a friend or a relative. And so I was aware enough that I was making these choices. I just didn't connect the dots that they were, I didn't think about the consequences of those choices.
Wow.
I was like, oh, of course, like I came here, like I chose to quit my job and like move to a different place to go to vet school. So of course I'm going to rearrange the way I spend my time to make sure that that goes the way I want it to. But I just didn't put together the fact that like ultimately it's going to go the way I want it to if I maintain healthy habits like exercise and staying in touch with my support system. And that like I just didn't realize that I was doing that to myself.
Right. I think a lot of us do that and we don't realize how important those things are, how much we need them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what was the feeling that you got? And was it at that point that you put all the pieces together and got those things back into your life?
No, like that, all the first year, I was kind of creating bad habits without necessarily realizing it. And during second year, and then like I thought the summer break might help and that I could reset on some stuff. Did like pretty quickly fell back into those same habits. So one, I wrote down a note ahead of this. Like one I remember is ice cream. Like I used to get ice cream as a celebration to like a treat after an exam, which would be every 4 weeks at Illinois. And then I would do it like during all exam week. So I would like extend that treat. And then, like before you know it, you go to the store and you realize that you grab ice cream every time. And it's like, that's not, that wasn't good for me. And I wasn't happy with that, but it was still happening. And I felt like I didn't have control. And that's another note I made to myself ahead of this is like what I was realizing was like the underlying theme for realizing I was burning out and feeling helpless is not feeling like I had control. And I couldn't decide. I didn't have any routines. Like I didn't have a set bedtime or a set time when I would wake up or a set time when I would stop studying and unwind. Like it felt like I was just like grasping at like, oh, here, like I'm awake and I know I have to study this. So like, I'm just going to do it instead of like sticking to a routine. And so like getting back to your question of how did I realize this was happening and like put all the pieces together. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, she suggested that I see a counselor. And I remember the first time that she suggested it, I honestly thought she was saying it as like for me to go learn about that, so that I knew what other people going through that was like, but not that like I needed the help for my own like mental health deficits. And
that sounds like denial.
Well, it sounds like it because it is. My wife originally suggested that I go talk to a professional about this. And I was originally thinking that it was going to be preventive care only. Like make sure, like, you've been reading, Matt, you've been reading a lot about vet students and professionals who end up with serious mental health issues. And I thought the advice was to go see somebody before I was dealing with a serious issue. But what I didn't understand is that she was trying to tell me gently that I was already experiencing a serious issue. And so as soon as she explained that to me, I did not like the idea of being somebody who is in denial. So I made sure to listen to her and take her advice to go seek professional guidance.
And did you see somebody, I mean, did your vet school have a counselor? My vet school had a counselor just for the vet students. Did yours have one?
At the time, no. They do now, which is really great. It's a huge positive change on campus there. And when I was there, so we didn't have somebody on campus at the vet school, but we had a couple of the talk therapists and psychiatrists associated with the university in general that specifically, like they were the ones who saw vet students the most. So they weren't necessarily on campus and dedicated only to the vet school, but they were looped into the fact that we, as a cohort and as a school, were in extra need of their care.
And how was your experience then?
My experience was, so the first person I saw was not a good fit. And that was really discouraging because, like the whole, like getting over asking my professor if I could take time off class, and like just the act of going off campus to a new part of town that I had never been to, and like, and like walking into a building like that and feeling embarrassed, like, oh, now I'm one of those people who like needs to have a therapist, and like all of that work and all those barriers just to have it not be a good fit. I was like, this sucks. Like, why is it so hard?
Yeah.
And so the first person I saw, we had 3 meetings, and I felt like the person didn't understand what I was saying. And so I eventually, but with the help of Kara, my wife, and like my support system at school, the consensus was, okay, it's not always going to be a good fit, and it's okay if you want to try a different therapist. I mean, same thing with a doctor, same thing with any professional relationship you have. Like if you're a pet owner and you go see a vet and it doesn't feel like the best fit, it's totally okay to go to a different one.
Exactly.
Not only is it okay, like it should be encouraged. It's necessary to go to one that you feel comfortable with. And so eventually I found somebody who was a better fit. And then that was a therapist, and that person put me in touch with a psychiatrist. And so the difference there, and I didn't know this difference at all till I went through it, is that therapists will like give you strategies, like non-medical strategies. And then a psychiatrist is somebody who can actually prescribe medication. And so I use a combination of both of those areas of expertise, and both of those, like, talking, writing, and then also medication, and ultimately worked out well. But it took a really long time, like with the getting over the hump of like even scheduling the first appointment, and then getting over the hump of trying to find a second person, and getting over the hump of am I going to be a person who is on like prescribed medication for mental health? And like, for a while, I didn't want to tell anyone that. I didn't even want to like admit that to myself. But, over the course, and this is the short version, but over the course of time, realized that it was just going to be like ignoring it. And, like you said, being in denial, these layers of denial, like that's just going to do more harm over the long run. So, it took a long time. But ultimately, I'm very happy that I found like I found people with professional training who could help with these kinds of things. Cause I don't, like you see the stories of what happens when people don't get that help.
Yeah.
And it's tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to point out, like you're talking about, you had to get over like your feelings of embarrassment. There's all these barriers that you had to overcome, and then you had to find a different team to help you. So there was a lot of work, it took a lot of persistence to find the right people, right? And if you're already depressed, that's even harder to do. So
It is
I
even
say
harder.
you should start like way before that. Honestly, I mean, vet school is so hard. Being a veterinarian, especially right out of school, so hard. I say, just go find somebody that you feel like you jive with before you even start having problems. Seriously. Just if you're not
Totally
having any
agree.
problems, just see them once a month or once every couple of months, but have them there so that when you need them, they're there and you don't have to
Yeah,
go through what you went through when you were already depressed.
exactly. And like, I remember, like my grandparents had diabetes, and then my dad was diagnosed as like a pre-diabetic. And, like at that point, like it's not just like eating a little bit differently or exercising a little bit more. Like it takes years to get to that point, and it takes years to get, to reverse all of that. If reversal at that point is even possible. And then to touch back on like being embarrassed and just like getting over that embarrassment, like we're re-recording this part of the podcast because the first time I talked about it, I like glossed over it and didn't realize at the time that I was just like skirting around it and not wanting to talk about it deeply. But I went back and re-listened, and I was like, oh, there are lots of parts of this story that I like. I don't think I was choosing to ignore them, but I definitely like subconsciously was ignoring them. Went back and re-listened, and I was like, oh yeah, there's a lot more to this. Like, like not finding the right fit, and like it taking years, and like I'm still like in, talking regularly with a therapist now, and it's great, but like that takes continued work. It's not just like I'm gonna like go talk to somebody one time about this thing. At least it wasn't for me. So yeah,
Wow.
it's a lifelong effort.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so I talked to, I don't know if you listened to the last podcast, but it was Dr. Dean Scott, and he's been in vet med for 35 years, and he's been practicing for 20, maybe long, I think 25 years. And he said that it took him 5 years after vet school to feel like normal again.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know like exactly what normal feels like, but I totally believe that. I I feel like I've reached the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of like having control over things, but uh, definitely you don't feel like I'm to the point where I could just like stop working on my mental health and just like set it and forget it. I'm not sure I'll ever feel like that, even though I felt like that before vet school started. Now I'm just so attuned to all of the inner workings in my own head. I'm like, oh yeah, that takes a lot of care and attention to maintain a good balance and a good position.
It does. And I wonder sometime, is it because I've had like high pressure jobs in the past? I was an advertising executive. I
Mm.
never like, okay, there was a lot of pressure. Everything was always urgent, whatever. But I never felt like I did as a veterinarian. And I wonder if it's just like the level of responsibility that we carry, whether you're in clinical practice or not. I mean, so you're not in clinical practice, but a lot hinges on you getting it right, on you knowing what you're talking about. That's a lot of pressure. I mean, I never had any idea before I became a veterinarian how complicated it is and how much responsibility we have.
It is. So I'm curious what you think. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I think a lot of people can make the case that their work environments are high pressure. Um, the difference that I see is like, I care about my work a lot more. I did in vet school, and I care about it more now because I feel like I've finally found a profession where I want to be there and I want to be present and like be the absolute best I can be. And I didn't always feel like that in my first career. So I'm wondering if you like, yes, it's high pressure, but also I'm like just more emotionally invested. Like I want to show up more.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, when I first started out in advertising, I was very emotionally invested. Like I cared, and then I was like, wow, this is totally meaningless. But at first I cared. But I don't know. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think we can stop caring about veterinary medicine. Maybe that's the difference. I went into advertising. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I care so much. And I was like, why do I care so much? But we can't say that about being vets.
I can't. I think I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. So did the therapist that you found that you got along with, did you get some good strategy? Like what were some of the strategies that you got from that therapist?
Probably the most helpful strategy was writing. So it could be anything from writing the dreams I had the night before, or writing a summary of my day, or one that I still use almost every day is if something is making me feel negative or making me feel anxious or stressed out, I write down, I try to put words to that feeling. And then I look at that sentence or that paragraph, and what happens, I would say like most of the time, I don't know, percentage, like 2/3 or 3/4, but most of the time I see that in writing, and it just looks so small afterwards, and it's easy to let go, which is the best outcome because then I can forget about it. And then the few times where I can't let it go after that because it still seems big, but then I've like identified something, and it still gets me to that, closer to that point of control, where like usually I see it, I can let it go, and if not, I'm like, okay, well, this isn't a thing I should let go, and like it is a thing I should bring up with, if it's my boss or my wife or whatever. Like it helps me like more clearly define what's happening.
Right.
So writing for me is a big one.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
Helps me with my writing skills in general, which I use all the time at work. So, that helps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because sometimes we don't know what we're thinking. I mean, we could just like ruminate, go around in circles, and then but if you actually have to write it down and name it.
Yeah.
And say, this is the emotion I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling it. Is that reasonable? Is there something I can do about this?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Were you able to create any good routines for yourself while you were in vet school? Did the therapist, because you started seeing the therapist while you were still a vet student, and part of the problem was that you weren't taking care of yourself when you were in vet school. And so did the therapist enable you to create some good routines for yourself? And were you successful in taking better care of yourself physically as well as mentally after you started seeing the therapist?
Yeah. I mean, there were wins and losses there. Probably the routine that I stuck with most closely was sleep. Of all the ways I could have done better about taking care of myself in vet school, I am happy with how quickly I noticed sleep was slipping away and how quickly I fixed that. I didn't do as good of a job in like physical exercise, nor did I do like a tremendous job in diet. I mean, these are things that I recognize and worked on, and like I didn't do a horrible job. And I'm probably, like my own toughest critic and hard on myself, but I am really just like looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm really thankful that I kept sleep as sacred as it was.
Yeah, sleep is super important. I feel like it's almost like what do they call it? Like a linchpin? Like if you lose that, everything else falls apart.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the foundation on which the rest of your health needs to be built. If you're not getting a good night's sleep, then your brain starts to malfunction. And,
Yeah. Yeah. That one, I just noticed everything else was spinning out of control so much faster when I started to have poor sleep habits. And so it just at a point became non-negotiable. Like I had to do that correctly or else there's no way to to do all of the things in vet school if you're not like putting yourself in a position to like even be awake for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I had the experience of being awake technically a lot of the time. I mean, my brain was not functioning at full capacity by any means, because I was not good about making sure that I got enough sleep in vet school at all. I was bad in every way. So,
well, yeah, and well, I guess I should say like sometimes even while I was like sleeping enough, that also meant I wasn't going to class, which is not a good habit either.
How could you get away with not going to class? We had mandatory classes.
Because they're all like recorded on, I forget the name of the software, but they're all captured and recorded so we could watch on our own time.
Wait. Your vet school did not have mandatory attendance?
Not for almost none of the classes did. Some of them did. They took attendance, or we had like a clicker. We had like questions during the middle of the lecture that you had to give an answer to. We called them clicker questions.
Yeah, we had those.
Yeah, but no, almost none of the classes were mandatory attendance.
You're kidding. At my vet school, they were mandatory.
No, I'm sorry.
and at most vet schools, they're mandatory. And that's one of the biggest difference between veterinary school and human medical school is veterinary school classes are almost always mandatory. And the medical students, they don't have to go to class. But so you had the luxury of not being, heck, I would totally have gotten enough sleep.
Wow. I mean, yeah, we had that luxury, but I would, I'd be there in bed, I'm not rested enough. I'm going to keep sleeping. I'll just watch this lecture later. But of course, almost every time I didn't. And then I would just rely on my study group to make a study guide for me. And bad habits just compounding and snowballing.
They snowball. It's like an avalanche. I know. Yeah.
But really, I probably wouldn't be able to pay attention at study group if I hadn't slept enough. So sleep for me is the number one. That's what I'm gonna.
So during school, I made a list of things that were non-negotiable, things that I wouldn't give up. But I still didn't feel like that was good enough because I wasn't able to add any habits onto that. So I guess I'll give a tangible example. So before vet school, I was going, I did yoga 3 times a week, and it was great, but I didn't know how great. I didn't know that, I felt great, but I didn't know how much of doing yoga 3 times a week was contributing to feeling great. Because I just wasn't paying attention to it. I wasn't thinking about, and I didn't pay attention to how it would feel if I stopped. I just was thinking about other things than awareness. And during school, when I cut that out, and so then got to the point where I was just talking about where I made a list of things that I wouldn't cut out, but I still didn't feel like I had time to add yoga back in on top of everything else. And that just made me sad. And so now I'm to the point after school where I can add habits back on, which feels really good. But to your question of was implementing anything successful? I think self-awareness was successful. Insofar as I realized, it's really important for me to have you call it quiet time or meditation or reflection or whatever. It's important for me to do that, 10 minutes a day.
That was one of the non-negotiable things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So exactly. So things like that, and biking. I used to bike it like before vet school. I used to bike everywhere, and during vet school, that stopped, and now I'm biking mostly everywhere again. So that feels really good. Um, and so part of the whole, like the big long term exercise has been, comparing what habits I had when I thought I was relatively mentally healthy, and then comparing the habits that I had when I thought I was less so. And now that I have both of those samples, I can try to like take what worked from each, because so I've been dwelling a lot on like what went wrong during vet school, but a lot went right, and I touched on that a little bit, but there was also, if we compare these two, like pre-vet school and during vet school, if I'm comparing those, pre-vet school, I was not like I mentioned earlier, I was not feeling very fulfilled at all by my professional um, uh, aspirations and or I guess endeavors would be a better word, because I didn't really have many professional aspirations. Like I wasn't volunteering in like television production associations, or like wanting to be involved with students who were going through the process of becoming television producers. Like now I feel like I found a profession where I feel like it's my family. And so that was a great part of veterinary school, and one of the reasons why I'm really happy I did it, and really proud, and look back on it with like overall with a positive, through a positive lens. Um, so taking, like taking the self-care part of pre-vet school and taking the connecting this fulfillment part of during vet school, and trying to make a balanced lifestyle out of those two things now post vet school. Yeah, I feel like I'm rambling.
But so do you think that, I'm just curious because, when vet school was 6 years ago for me. I've been out for 6 years now. And so looking back, like I did the same thing you did. I was like, oh my God, there's an exam every week, and 3 quizzes a week, and I don't have time to exercise, take care of myself, blah, blah, blah. And that all went out the window. But I like to think that um, if I'd created a routine for myself, I could have stuck with it. And do you think you could have and still gotten through? Because when you're in vet school, I think the reason that we throw all that stuff out the window is because we're scared. We're scared we're going to fail a class. We're going to fail out of vet school.
Yeah.
And so it's just not worth the risk to take care of ourselves. But you've been out for 1 year now, a little less than 1 year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so looking back, do you think you could have taken better care of yourself and still passed your classes and still gotten your degree?
100%. I think I would even say that if I had taken better care of myself, I would have seen better results.
Yeah.
I think my approach strategy is similar to a lot of student strategies going in, which was my routine was to survive vet school. So I was committed to that routine.
Mine too.
Yeah. And so I think, yeah, I mean, anybody who can get into vet school can commit to a routine. I mean, I was working full time and taking classes at night and on the weekends, and like I committed to that routine. So you can commit to anything. It's just like, you can train your brain to do amazing things.
Yes. You just have to get over the fear that causes you to throw all those other things away. Because that's what it was for me. Is that what it was for you?
Say more about that.
Just feeling like, if I don't spend every minute studying, then I'm going to fail.
Yeah.
You mentioned that when you first started, there were a couple quizzes you didn't do too well on, and that's when you thought, okay.
Yeah. So definitely, I remember like staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning at the anatomy lab, and the nights before exams, staying up till like sometimes doing all-nighters, and that was the routine I was committed to. I would plan for that, and figure out how to, because I thought that was the best way to get the results I wanted. But it turns out there's science behind this. It turns out if you exercise and eat healthy, you have more energy to study and retain and stay awake, and be present for the knowledge that you're trying to
absorb,
assimilate. Yeah, like
yeah.
It, I,
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
True.
Yeah,
It's true. And I remember, like, and after a while of pushing yourself that hard, staying up late, not exercising, not eating right, you you think that you're doing everything that you can to get good grades, but at the same time you're so run down that you're not effectively absorbing the material.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and uh, one of the things I would say. So this is. So one of the things I would say to anybody applying to veterinary school, or going through it, is this is one of the lessons I learned like day one of my first degree of journalism school, which is know your audience. And in this context, your audience is yourself, because as you're navigating your way through vet school, you're gonna like you're gonna have you're gonna have to excuse me, you're gonna have to use things like self-awareness. There's the way that you talk to yourself. Like, are you telling yourself that you're not good enough? Because I know I do that a lot. I used to do a lot more until I realized how harmful that was.
Mm-hmm.
So self is a theme in this journey. And if you don't know yourself, like I don't feel like I knew myself very well at all going into vet school. And that's why I said, like, I learned more about myself than I did about being a doctor. I didn't I didn't really know that it would bother me again to like stop exercising or stop reading novels. And it was just like stuff that I was like, oh, well, that's kind of stuff I did to fill my time. Or like going to see live music was a thing that I did quite a bit before vet school, and stopped almost immediately after school started. And I wish I wouldn't have. That like that was such a healthy distraction, like a healthy way to spend time. And so anyway, back on the theme of self, everything's gonna go so much better. Like school, but also like relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but friendships and relationships with professors. Like if you have an understanding of yourself and how it fits into a relationship, it's just going to be a lot smoother ride.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, a lot of people that go into veterinary school many of them are coming directly from their first undergraduate degree, and they're young, and it takes a lot of time to get to know yourself. Like
Yeah.
I'm 49. I'm starting to get to know myself. So it's like a lifelong endeavor. But
Yeah.
I really appreciate how candid you're being about the challenges that you had, and retrospectively the solutions that you think would have been helpful. And I think that's exactly what students should know going into vet school is don't give that stuff up. Don't. You really
Yeah.
can do it if you
Yeah.
still take care of yourself. I mean, half an hour a day, really, half an hour.
Yeah. And so I'll say, just to balance it out, I feel like I failed in exercise. I succeeded in sleep. I noticed that my sleep patterns were trending downward. And it was really important to me to cut that off. I guess more important than exercise, actions speak louder than words. But I feel like I corrected sleep, and that was really helpful throughout fourth year. I did finally learn to like say at a certain point, stop futzing around with this medical record. Like the intern or the resident, whoever's reading it is going to send it back with corrections anyway. So like,
right.
Just go to bed. Yeah.
Yeah. Am I going to fail this rotation if I don't correct this sentence? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So let me just backtrack a little bit, because you said that originally you wanted to be a large animal veterinarian, and I assume that's because, did you grow up around large animals?
No, not really. My grandparents lived on a farm, but no, that came from one of the pre-vet experiences I had shadowing an ambulatory large animal veterinarian. And I loved it. And I read the James Herriot books, and I thought that would be
James
cool,
Herriot.
to like have a clinic out of my truck and like driving through the countryside. And I thought that sounded great. And then during school, I took a public health course and a policy course, and realized that the reasons that I wanted to be a large animal clinician, all those reasons were like amplified in the role of a public health veterinarian or policy veterinarian.
And was this class, public health and policy, was it an elective or was it a core course that everybody had to take?
It was an elective.
Okay. All right. And did you have tracking at Illinois?
Yeah.
Like small animal, public?
We had 2 tracks, and it was basically like one was small animal and one was not small animal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So pretty crude tracks.
Yeah. Because at Virginia Tech, we had small animal, large animal, there was a public corporate track.
Yeah. I know.
There was a mixed animal track.
I've heard of that. I think that would be really cool to do
the public corporate track.
Yeah.
Oh, I tell you what, looking back, I wish I had. I really wish I had. So what was it? So that course you enjoyed so much, and you felt like that's when you had the epiphany that you were going to follow that path rather than the path of clinical practice.
Yeah. So that was one of the epiphanies. There were a few along the way. So the guy who taught that course is also the coordinator for the Masters in Public Health program, which is a joint degree program between the campus in Chicago and the campus in Urbana. And he was also a AAAS fellow alum. And so he was in Dick Durbin's office back in 2004, if I remember correctly. And so he did this program that I'm doing now. And I just thought it sounded really cool. And that was the first experience that opened my eyes to the non-traditional world of veterinary medicine. Because I didn't really know that vets could do that. And so that was one. Another was I had a summer internship with USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. And I spent the summer at a hog slaughterhouse, and that was very educational, pretty eye-opening. It definitely sparked my interest in food policy infrastructure in general. So anything in terms of like animal welfare to environmental regulations, like the impacts that industrial farming has on water and soil quality, to like food labeling and the way that food moves through the chain from producer to supplier to consumer. That's all really interesting and fascinating to me. And I think that veterinarians have a unique role to play in those conversations. I think the third impactful experience was organized veterinary medicine and serving as student AVMA president. That was like the coolest. I say that's the coolest thing I've ever done besides getting married. It was
better.
What's that?
You better say getting married was the coolest thing you ever done.
No, that really was the coolest. I had no idea how amazing that would be. But yeah, the SAVMA president, that 2 years was that just like kind of put the accelerator on exposing me to all the ways that veterinarians contribute to global health at large, I guess I should say.
You got exposed to that in SAVMA.
Yeah, just because from like going to meetings to represent the SAVMA at the AVMA board of directors meeting, or at like an AAVMC conference or the AVMA economic summit, and hearing from all these different stakeholders in the profession. I was like, whoa, like there's a lot that we can do once we survive school. And so back to your question, like I saw a need for veterinarians to contribute at the intersection between legislation and the profession, because it impacts all of us. And I saw a need, and I saw that I enjoy it. Like I really like people, and I love animals, but I love working with people, and I love working with vet students, for example. It makes me, and that was part of the cool thing about being at vet school in general, was being around so many people who had this shared passion. So I saw a need for it. I saw that I like it, and I also think that I have the skill set for it. With my first career, spending so much time writing and interviewing and listening and editing and around language and communications, I found that something that had frustrated me about the whole transition, like I mentioned earlier, like, why did I spend so much time and money on this degree? And now coming full circle to realize that this area of the profession that I want to contribute in, I actually spent time preparing for it without realizing it.
That's amazing. I mean, because you were a dog walker, and then you volunteered at a shelter, and you followed an ambulatory vet around. And so you originally went to vet school because you wanted to work directly with animals. And while you were in vet school, you discovered this whole other universe where your career wouldn't actually be working with animals. But, originally it was your passion for animals that got you into vet school, but then you discovered a different passion while you were in vet school.
Yeah.
And it really resonates with who you are and what's important to you, and the previous and skill set that you built up. It's a pretty amazing story. You stayed open-minded throughout vet school and found this path that you didn't even know existed.
Well, and so I think there are some parallels there to the mental health journey. So I think, with the mental health, nothing had really challenged me or pushed me to the point where I had to learn those things about myself earlier. And so once vet school did, I guess I should thank vet school for allowing me to learn those things about myself and how to take care of myself.
What a positive attitude.
Yeah. I think the same thing happened in vet school. I didn't really ever stop long enough to think about that. It was the people that I loved about preparing for vet school. The reason that I wanted to be a large animal vet was because the guy I shadowed was my favorite. He was my favorite shadowing experience. The guy who taught my public health and policy course, he was my favorite teacher. So of course I wanted to do what he did. So it's the people more than the content. And so I learned that and took that into my current job. And what we're learning about ourselves at work now is we have really different communication styles, because I will say at work what I just said to you, which is like, I I prioritize like people getting along and like having a good culture, and like, so whatever I can do to contribute to that, like whoever needs help with a project or like whatever you need me to do, I'm very happy to do it, because that means the whole team's happy, and then I feel great. And like other people at work are saying, but like, what kind of issue areas do you want to work on? Like, what policies do you want to like dive deep into? And so it's this back and forth of like, and I guess it's not surprising at all that I am that way. I think a lot of veterinarians are that way. They prioritize helping. They prioritize the needs of others before the needs of themselves.
They do.
Which is, I think, a lot of what can lead to the mental health issues in the first place, is when you're just straight up not taking care of yourself, because you're taking care of animals or fill in the blank. You're taking care of something else besides yourself.
Dr. Holland, did they ever do like a Myers-Briggs test on you guys at Illinois? I know some vet schools do. I'm just wondering if you're like an introvert or an extrovert.
Yeah, I've done it personally. So I am an INFJ.
Okay.
And are you familiar with the Veterinary Leadership Experience, VLE?
No, I'm not. Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. I recommend it. Oh, well, it's so it's a week-long program. It's the signature program of the Veterinary Leadership Institute. So that's VLI. And you can find all this on Facebook, and then they have a website too. But the
I'll
VLE,
put it in the show notes too.
Okay, great. The VLE, the experience, is a week-long, I guess, retreat in the summer, in like the first week of June or first half of June, in Idaho, and it's 2 students from each school, and then some representation. It's about like 2/3 students and 1/3 veterinarians, and they come from all over, from industry or practice or wherever.
Wow.
And it's kind of it's like emotional intelligence, self-improvement, like a kind of like a, like that kind of those kinds of discussions, those kinds of exercises for a week. And
a crash course on all the stuff they don't have time to teach you in vet school.
yeah,
Yeah.
really. I found it to be life-changing. I went the summer after my first year, and then I had volunteered to go back the summer after my second year and third year. I love it.
Are you thinking of maybe going back now that you're a veterinarian and being one of the veterinarians participating in it?
Yes, but in paying attention to self-care, I realized that it was going to be too much to fit in this year. Don't have the energy to like do that.
Good for you. There's some boundaries, making some boundaries.
Yeah, that's really hard. Yeah, because I should not have gone back 2 other times during vet school when I was trying to balance like this summer internship in Minnesota at the hog plant, like trying to do all these things. Yeah. Anyway, so I would love to go back. Now's not the best time. But so we did the Myers-Briggs, and that is part of learning. My biggest indicator on that is the F. Like the other 3 are mostly in the middle, but I'm all the way on the F side, which is
feeling.
Yes, it's feeling. Yeah, it is. Like knowing that about myself helps me understand how to navigate.
Yeah. So for those people listening who don't know Myers-Briggs and the 4 letters, there's an I or an E. I is introvert, E is extrovert, and then there's IN. It's N or S, and N is intuitive, where you form your ideas based on your intuition and your inner thoughts, versus sensing, which is you take information from the outside world to form your opinions and perceptions. And then the next one is F, feeling, or T, thinking. And so I think those are pretty self-explanatory.
Lead with your heart or lead with your brain. Yeah.
Right. And then the last one is either J, judging, or P. What's the P stand for?
Perceiving.
Perceiving. Okay. Because I'm a J, judging, and J people are planners. Like, we plan a lot. Are you a planner? Because you said J. You said INFJ.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more or less.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. My husband is a P, perceiver. And I always forget what the P stands for because I call it flying by the seat of your pants. Because that's how he prefers to live his life. Drives me crazy. But yeah, so those are the 4 letters. And it does, I mean, it helps you understand yourself a lot better and what your needs are and how you interact with the world. So if you haven't taken it, I highly suggest taking it. A lot of vet schools offer it. It's part of learning about yourself.
Yeah, I recommend it. I would give it the caveat that it's not prescriptive. It's more informative. Like, if you test as something, that doesn't mean you're incapable of of things outside the box that they put you in.
Yes, very good caveat. Very good caveat. I will say though, boy, after I took that and knowing what I was, an INTJ, and then finding out what my husband was, it helped me get along with him a lot better. I was like, oh, you're a P. You just can't help it.
Yeah.
I just need to, and I'm a J. Like, that's where all of our conflict is. So it helped me a lot. And I've heard it, it can help people in professionals, relationships as well, just to be aware of like how you like to do things is not how everybody else likes to do things.
Yes.
It goes into the emotional intelligence that you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So VLI and VLE, that sounds really interesting. I want to put that in the show notes for sure. But tell me now, so in 4th year in your clinical rotations at Illinois, that's when you applied for the American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellowship Program, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And is it pretty competitive? I would think it's pretty competitive.
I think so. I don't know exactly how many people applied, but there are three veterinarians each year that. So it's AAAS, and then also combined with the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, and they sponsor 3 veterinarians each year. So
yeah, and by sponsor, like, you're given a salary.
Yes, yeah, thankfully.
Yeah, right. And it's enough to live on in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. It's public, so it's $85,000 for the year, which is, I mean, given what I was hemorrhaging out during vet school, I think this is outstanding. It's greater. I mean, granted, DC is an insane cost of living, but it's higher than the average starting salary for a veterinarian.
Yeah, it is.
So you're not gonna hear any complaints from me. I think it's great.
Plus, I think you get like a $6,000 stipend for health insurance, right?
Yes, and help relocating if you move.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, so I was fortunate enough to sit on the board of directors of the AVMA for 2 years, and they're very aware of not only aware but addressing proactively how to help students with their student loans. So so any program that AVMA has our name on, it, like, you can rest assured that they're going to be treating their people well.
Good. That's great to hear. Yeah. And so you moved then from Illinois to Washington, D.C. Your wife went with you. And did she have to change jobs, or what does she do?
Gosh, you could do a whole podcast on her, I feel like. So she was living in Chicago while I was in vet school, and she was also in the middle of transitioning careers. So she, right around when I graduated, she graduated from University of Chicago with a master's in threat response management, and had been working as a communications and public relations manager for an international HR firm. And so she went to grad school and moved you know, her job ended, finished school, moved here with me. And about a week after we got here, she went to Houston to volunteer for 2 weeks to go help with the hurricane recovery. And that was in September, and now it's February 11th, and she's in Puerto Rico, but she's still helping with the hurricane response, which is why that earlier when we mentioned her and I said that she's awesome, it's because she's a real life superhero.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is this her new career? I mean, if she's doing like a disaster, what is it called? You said her master's was in threat management.
Yeah, threat response management.
Threat response management
is the official title, but it's so she had been volunteering at the Chicago Red Cross for 4 years beforehand, and she'll, like, the buzzwords around the profession that she'll be in is like disaster response or preparedness or emergency management. You know, like FEMA would be a great fit.
Right, FEMA. Yeah. Okay.
And so yeah, she her dream job would be less travel, more planning, more on the planning and prevention side than response. But she didn't have a job when we moved, and her plan was to just come out here. And I mean, there's tons of so FEMA or Department of Homeland Security or Red Cross or International Red. I mean, there's tons of options out here for her, so she wasn't too worried about eventually finding something. But when Harvey struck, she didn't have anything, and they obviously needed anybody they could, especially somebody with her skills. I mean, they would take a warm body, but she actually, just finished getting a master's in this. So it was not surprising at all when she called from Houston and said, they want me to stay. They're going to hire me. They're offering me a contract to stay, but they want me to stay. And I was like, great, of course. Like, that's wonderful. Like, it's not wonderful that hurricanes are happening, but it's great that that it's able to be a launching pad for her new career and her new professional trajectory. So
so is she living in Houston now?
She's in San Juan.
Right now she's in San Juan, but you said that in Houston they offered her a contract.
Yeah, they offered her a contract to stay in Houston for about 6 weeks, and then at the end of that contract, she called and said they want me to go to Puerto Rico.
Oh wow!
It's been going great for her. The only complaint I have about life right now is that she is so far away, but the fellowship is going really well, and it's so nice to hear her report fulfillment from the way that she's spending her time. So she's working 6 days a week, 12, 14-hour days, but she's loving it. Wow. And she didn't really love her last job.
Wow. Well, good for both of you. That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
It's just a temporary separation, temporary long distance relationship.
And we just found out she's going to be back next weekend, for good.
Oh, for good. Oh, good. And like you said, you're in Washington, D.C. I mean, I'm sure there's tons of opportunities in her areas of interest.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to be, always away from you.
Right. And part of the reason we wanted to come out here is because it's, there's a unique energy and a unique collection of interests out here. And there are certain things that you can only do in DC, like meet people from different branches from all three branches of government, all in the same day if you want to dive into that. And so I guess what I'm getting at is we planned out that DC won't be permanent for us. And so we wanted to kind of make the most of it while we were here. And so it's silver lining. I know you mentioned earlier, what an optimistic way to look at vet school. I am definitely an optimist to a fault. But I think silver lining of her being away for so long is that she got to really dive into work, and it allowed me to really dive into work. I can go in early or stay late, or really give as much time to work as I want if it's gonna be fulfilling and worth it, because that's now our current setup until she returns.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what do you think? Because I can imagine that there's quite a lot of people who would like to do this fellowship that you're doing. Even, so vet school, vet students or people that are going into vet school, but even current veterinarians who are thinking of maybe switching from clinical practice to non-clinical work. What is it that you think made you competitive for the fellowship?
I would say relationships.
Like your professor who does the MPH program at Illinois.
Yeah.
Because he did it 3 times.
He did it 3.
Didn't you say he was a triple AAS fellow?
Oh, I'm sorry. So triple AS, like AAAS.
Oh, okay. I thought you said triple AAS. Okay, so he did it
I'm
once.
glad for the clarification because, I wouldn't want to be misleading.
Because I have heard of people who do it more than once.
Well, so I'm applying for we can talk about that for next later, but yes, there is a chance I'm a double AAAS fellow. Yeah. So relationships, I would really emphasize that. So working backwards from okay, if you want to be a veterinarian who works in policy, what makes someone good at working in policy? And I think it's really important to understand, maybe the most important thing to understand about policy is that it's competing interests. It's not like good or bad. I know how I personally align on the political spectrum, but it's really, I need to remember that people who don't align on areas with me aren't doing that because they're malicious or because they're out to get me. Because I'm not I don't view myself as malicious or out to get someone who I disagree with. So it's only fair that I owe the same in reciprocation. Mm-hmm. So anyway, understanding that policy is competing interests because an example within our profession is I was at this was at AVMA at the winter House of Delegates meeting a couple years ago, and there was a really fierce internal debate over AVMA's stance on feral cats, and it's not surprising at all to realize that the loudest voices on either side of the debate were the feline practitioners and the avian practitioners. Of course, so
right.
You've got feral cats that are in some cases devastating to avian populations, and so nobody wants to kill birds and nobody wants to kill cats, and everybody wants the best in the end, but it's competing interests, and so that example applies to everything in the world.
It does.
And so why after understanding that is relationships important, or are relationships important? Well, it's important for me in that context to have somebody who I know and trust at the avian practitioners and the feline practitioners, so that when a conversation like this comes up, I know that there is a reliable and trustworthy source of information, instead of feeling lost in that moment. So having relationships in place for when you need them. That's its own practice of disaster preparedness. But a great example in my own work is there were 2 grocery stores that closed in my boss's district, and the city is called Peoria, Illinois, and the city was really upset to hear that news. I don't know if you're familiar with the term food desert, but there was already a food desert in Peoria, and that news meant that it would only grow in size. And fortunately, one of my coworkers had relationships with people who specifically spend time their job, the mission of their nonprofit is to go into low-income communities to address food deserts. And like, she had that relationship already in place. And if she didn't, we would have been like, we don't know anyone who does this. But in the moment, she's like, I met this person like at a reception and kept their contact info handy. And like, now this is the person who we need to talk to. And it's having those relationships and knowing what priorities different stakeholders have, because you can't predict what policies are going to come up. Like, you can't predict when Ebola or high path avian influenza is going to happen. But when it does happen, having a strong network of relationships and people who like know and trust each other, that can make the difference between, a successful response or not.
Yeah.
So relationships would be my number one piece of advice.
Okay. And I guess forming those relationships when you're in vet school is like being actively involved in SAVMA, the Student American Veterinary Medical Association.
Yeah, I would have, like, if that didn't work out, I would have volunteered probably more on the local level, like with my county public health department. I actually, like, I had a job lined up with them, like a summer job lined up with them. And then it didn't work out because that other one, the FSIS one in Minnesota at the slaughterhouse. But I had that. The reason I had that set up was because I, on the advice of the guy who taught my policy course, he was like, well, you should know the public health personnel here, like at the county public health department.
Wow.
And there was like, so I reached out to them and had a chat, like with no intention. Like, I didn't have an outcome in mind. I didn't have a pitch. I wasn't asking for anything. I just wanted to get to know them, what they spent time on. And then a couple months later, they're like, hey, we're hiring for a summer job for a grad student. Like, and we know you. And,
Neat.
And yeah. And so that.
So wait, you called them up and you said, what? I'm a vet student and would you like to have lunch?
Well, I told them that Dr. Herman told me I should call you. So I'm calling you.
Okay.
This person who seems to, like.
Okay. So did he give you a specific contact?
Yeah.
A person. Yeah. Oh, okay. And then you met for lunch?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's what I do that all the time. I do that at my job now. If I read an article that interests me, I will like try to contact the person who wrote it, or if they reference, like, if the part that's interesting to me is somebody they write about, like a subject, then I'll try to contact that subject. And it works more often than not to just reach out. Like, I reached out to a professor at Colorado State who worked on food deserts and like wrote a paper about it. And it probably helped that I could say, hey, I work for a member of Congress. Like, that probably helps somebody say, yeah, I'll talk to you. But it definitely, like, it was great to talk with him because it turned out he had just met with former Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack the week before, and he had all this information to share with me that like wasn't published yet, but he didn't mind. He didn't mind if I saw it, and it really, like, it helped me do my job better. And now I have a contact, this relationship, like if I ever need it again.
Right.
And so I try to practice that all the time.
Right. Okay. Interesting, because you're an INFJ, so you're an introvert, and yet you're like reaching out to all these people and forming these relationships. So, and it sounds like you're just curious about other people.
Yeah, I am, and it's so I am an introvert, and I'm right on the middle, I should say. So it's like, compared to my wife is like extremely introverted, so she makes me look like a very large extrovert. But anyway, I have paid attention to what happens when I do, like, the whole process of that leads to really good results. And so it just, like, I keep doing it because why wouldn't I keep doing something that keeps producing good results? So that slight discomfort of like sending an email to a stranger, like calling a stranger, that's like, I found really healthy to like stretch that comfort zone a little bit and like just kind of go outside. And and to keep, like, I mean, again, it's like the weightlifting example. Like, it's, you only get stronger, like, you only get the benefit you're hoping for if it is uncomfortable and it is like a little bit hard to do the thing you're doing. And then it's hard, and after a while you can't do it anymore, but after you recover, like, you're actually in a better place than when you started. And so that's what emphasizing relationships has done for me. It's what's like really hard about it now, I found, is like maintaining them.
Right, because you've got all these people, right? What, do you send Christmas cards?
Well, no, and I've now what I haven't to deal with like feeling guilty about not maintaining relationships. Usually it's almost always like self-inflicted guilt. Like, I'll see somebody's name on Facebook, or like I'll think of somebody and be like, oh, I haven't talked to them in a while, and I bet they think I'm like not a good friend for like letting it go on so long. But almost always that's a projection, and like it's me who is making that up.
Yeah, it's that self-talk again.
Yeah, but that's like, now that I have this like collection of people who I feel like have been my support system and helped me get through. Now I have to understand how to manage my own feelings towards, like, managing the relationships.
Right. Yeah. That's why I decided in high school that I didn't want to be popular, because it's a lot of work. It is. Bloody hell. Now, but tell me a bit about.
You had the decision. I didn't have the decision. So you said you decided not to be popular. I think.
Well, yeah. I had to cut back. It was getting out of hand. But what was the application process like? Did you go for an interview? Was it like applying for a job?
So there are 3 phases. The first phase, I think, was due like yesterday. Well, I guess it depends on when this comes out, but it was due February 10th.
Yes. Yeah. I saw that.
Yeah.
February 9th.
So that I did that last year, and that's a statement of purpose and a letter of intent, and letters of recommendation, resume, all that like basic stuff. And then the next phase is to write a memo, and it was timed. But also we had like 4 days, so plenty of time. Like, we got an email on a Friday. It was like, congrats, you made it to the next round. Like, here is an assignment for a memo that's due Monday. And so we had a long weekend to work on that, and then it was an in-person interview. It was the third and final.
So what was the memo that you were assigned to write?
I don't actually know if I could like talk about the details, because they might use that.
Oh, okay.
They might use it like some of their. Totally. But I can try to be more specific.
Unfair advantage.
Yeah. I mean, but like a memo in general in the policy world, so like I can talk about a memo that I would write. I'll talk about a memo I wrote on Friday, the last day I was at work. There's a letter circulating around Congress about the Canada links. So at the end of the Obama administration, the Fish and Wildlife Service at the end of 2016 reported that the Canada lynx was endangered, and that the circumstances were making things worse and not better. And then that was a draft of the species summary. And then just recently, like a couple months ago, the Fish and Wildlife Service issued a final species summary and like changed a bunch of the language, saying that it's not endangered and there's not a problem, and they wanted to remove it off the endangered species list. And
weird.
So there's a letter like going around Congress, in response to the change of that language. And so I wrote a memo to one of my colleagues explaining what I thought about it. And in order to know what I thought about it, I had to reach out. So again, touching on relationships, I had to reach out to some folks who with expertise in that area. Cause like I knew what I thought about reading after reading about it, but I also know that I'm not an expert in that area. like being a veterinarian does not make me an expert in wildlife policy or like intra-state and international policy, because it's both the southern part of Canada and the northern part of the U.S. So I thought I should reach out to some expert opinion. So I did. Found out, like, what I found out was definitely filled in some blanks for me and changed what I would have written. And so I took all that, wrote it to my colleague, who ultimately had the final say on whether or not my boss signed on to that letter. So that's like a memo, and it was like 1 page, and I was like, here's the situation, kind of like what I just explained to you. 2 years ago this happened, a year ago this happened, here's, like, after checking the science, like, here's kind of the state of play, and now you can say yes or no after you're informed.
So this is, I mean, it's exactly what you said that you wanted to do, was to infuse public policy with science. So you've got the brain to understand science. That doesn't mean that you understand wildlife conservation, like you were saying, or all these other things. But your job is to use your scientific brain and your social brain, reach out, get the information, put it together in sort of make your professional scientific recommendation to somebody who doesn't know as much as you do about science.
Yeah.
Nice.
You said it, yeah, better than I could have. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. So are you working with like in a senator's office or with?
Illinois Congresswoman Cherry Bustos. So she's in the House of Representatives.
Okay.
And it's the northwest part of the state. So it borders Wisconsin and Iowa. The big cities are, I don't know which listeners would be familiar, but Rockford, Peoria, and the Quad Cities. Quad Cities is where Augustana is, and I know they have a pre-vet agreement with University of Illinois. So maybe there's some Augustana listeners out there.
Okay. And the AAAS fellowship program, AVMA program, they placed you in this office?
So no. Short answer, no.
Yeah.
I'll try to explain the start to finish of it also.
Right. After you, like, okay, congratulations, you're a fellow. Now what?
Yeah. Okay. So AVMA, it's all AVMA up to that point. AVMA, so AAAS is based in DC, and it's their mission to, I mean, I don't have it like memorized verbatim, but it's essentially to infuse scientists into the public sphere. And so they play a convening, facilitating role in this process. So they have an arrangement with AVMA. They also have an arrangement with like 20 to 25 other similar societies. So like geographic, energy, like robotics, etc. In fact, almost all of the other programs are PhDs and not clinical, not MD or dentistry or anything. So there are about 35 fellows, legislative fellows, that host/sponsor societies bring from their professions to and like funnel us to DC for a year. And so we all go through an orientation process together. And at the end of that orientation, there's a reception. And this reception is attended by sometimes like the legislative director, the chief of staff for an office, or sometimes the member themselves. For instance, we had Al Franken at our reception this has been September. And so it's those people like vying for a year of time from a fellow
that somebody else is paying for.
Right. So you nailed it. And that's why there's so much demand, is because a member of Congress, their salary comes from taxpayer dollars. And so I come from AVMA membership dollars. So I'm free more or less to this office and so, which is one reason why it's tough to stick on the Hill afterwards, because they can't just, like, my job doesn't exist, once the fellowship's over, they would have to fire somebody to make room in the payroll for me. And that's like not something that I would want or like that. So typically it like ends up being just a year long.
I see.
Unless the timing.
And then like, okay, so there's this reception and it's sort of like a speed dating, right?
Yeah.
Looking for, I mean, do you bring your resume? Do they know who you guys are? Because there's a lot of fellows there, right? And you're mingling and like, is this like you're just thrown in there and like, okay, go find a job?
Yes. What? Yes to all the questions you just asked. So yeah, you bring your resume,
chaos.
Bring your business card, and people are drinking, and it's like it's nuts. Yeah, and so
what? It's like musical chairs, though. But
yeah,
like, what happens if at the end of the night you don't have a chair?
So that night is for setting up interviews. It's like the AAAS has pretty strict arrangement with Congress, I guess, with the Senate, U.S. Senate, and the House of Representatives that they won't hire anybody until, so that reception is on a Monday, and that they won't hire anybody until at the earliest Friday of that week, so that everybody has a chance to go interview with the offices that they want. But yeah, that night at that reception, we get a book of the open offices and like the policy issue areas that might come up during that year. And there are like almost 100 of those positions for, I think there were 35 or 40 fellows. So there's already
that
like
makes me feel better.
Yeah. Nobody ends up without a chair. So sometimes it takes longer. Like it just doesn't feel like the right fit, or like I didn't get a good feeling from this interview. But yeah, you're like free labor for an office, and like a super, like a genius, like a doctor, a PhD, or a DVM. Yeah. So yeah, the competitive part is over at that point. I felt like it was. You do get some people though who like, like try to set up interviews before you're supposed to, and like try to race the gunners. Like there's always gunners in the scientific community.
Yeah. And so did you go into this reception knowing, did you have an idea of the people that you wanted to interview with and the policies that you were specifically interested in?
Yes. Yeah. I had a few offices in mind, and so it turned out some offices had me in mind too. Like they came and found me, and they're like, "This is you, right? Like we're interested in what you are offering, what you bring to the table." I was like, "Whoa, that is nuts."
That's like, cool.
Yeah. It was really cool. It was cool to like have that experience and be able to be like proud, part of what I've learned about like the mental health challenges is like sometimes you just need to like celebrate yourself and take a minute and step back and be like, this is like kind of a subject change, and we can bookmark it and talk about it later. But I failed in NAVLE the first time I took it, and part of what helped me like process all that was realizing that like 4 years of vet school, like I still did that. That's a huge accomplishment. Like a test is, yeah, it's a bummer that I didn't pass it, but like it's just a test, and I'll get there. And like still to focus so much on that is ignoring, like it's not focusing on other major accomplishments. Anyway, so yeah, that night was like really surreal, and like having these emails from like Bernie Sanders' office and Kamala Harris's office, and like that was a real thing that was happening for me one day a few months ago.
That's magical. Oh, I have to ask though, was this reception was like black tie? I'm trying to visualize it.
No, I wouldn't say black tie. No.
Okay. Business casual.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we're all in like suits and interview attire, but yeah, it was a pretty casual setting. Like all the members of Congress got up and like they were making jokes, and it was a light feeling. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And then, so you did your interviews and you got did you get more than one offer? I bet you did.
Yeah. I think a lot of people did. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause you said there's like 100 slots, and
statistically speaking. And
Yeah.
and you can, like, you have the latitude to go, like, I could approach an office that wasn't on this list, because some offices might not even be aware of the AAAS program.
Wow.
So you can go say, hey, I am in DC for a year and free to your office. Like, could you use someone like me, even though you're not familiar with the fellowship? So that's an option for people too. But yeah, I over the course of the orientation process decided that I wanted to, like, chart a new course for the fellowship, because part of the reason why I was interested in this program in the first place was to carry out that mission of bringing science, and in particular vet med and policy, closer together. And so there are all these offices that have a fellow every year, and they have, like, a very refined process, and it's like, exactly what you're getting into. And I'm certainly not knocking anybody who chose that experience, because I bet it's going great. And I know, like, some people I know who chose that, it's going great for them. I and you probably noticed some themes on, like, things I mentioned earlier, but I wanted to go outside my comfort zone a little bit. So I wanted to go. It was appealing to me to go to an office that had not had a fellow before, because after this year, the office can say that it's happened before, and, like, there's a new connection between the fellowship and Congress. And it was in the House, and, like, a lot of people go to the Senate, because the Senate offices they just have the bandwidth to integrate a fellow into their operation at a level, like, some Senate offices are like 30, 40, 50 people. And so you can have, like, a dedicated fellow mentor, and you can do the whole fellowship together that whole year. And that goes great for some people. But in a House office, you only have, like, our legislative team, it's like 5 people. And so I am absorbing a lot more of, like, the like, the typical day to day of a legislative office in Congress. Like, I have helped on, I think, like, every single policy issue area there is, versus in the Senate, like, you might stick with, like, only healthcare, and that's okay if that's the experience that you're looking for. Again, it touches on, like, knowing yourself and knowing what you want out of a certain experience, and, like, putting yourself in a position to succeed and get that out of the experience. But yeah, I wanted the other thing is that my boss is a Democrat. Sherry Bustos is a Democrat, but the district that she represents voted for Trump for president, and so it's a pretty different constituency. Like, it's a pretty different Democratic constituency than your typical one, and that I knew that would be challenging for me too. And also, she's a former journalist, so that makes 3 of us, I guess. And of those, there are, like, 12 districts that fit that category of a Democrat winning in Congress and Trump winning in the presidential election. And she won by the most. She got 60% of the vote. So I knew that something about her messaging and her communications was different, and she was able to get through to her constituents in a way that other people in her position weren't, for one reason or another. And it was really appealing to me to go be in an environment where I could experience all that, like, a priority on communications, a priority on working together with people who, like, don't always align with the way that you do. And one thing that I really like about her is she would much rather focus on areas where there is an appetite for collaboration than like make things difficult for people just because she disagrees with them.
Right.
And I really, I appreciate that example that she sets. And it's been it's about halfway through. The fellowship will be done in August, and it's been great. It's been I liked it a lot.
That's really interesting. And I like this path that you're forging too, because I mean, if you look at Facebook, like, you can't even have a conversation anymore, because it's just what I think versus what you think. And, you're stupid or I'm stupid, and we're just going to stay over here on opposite sides of the room and yell at each other.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, well, I can see why you would feel this way, and trying to come together. And it's just like, this polarized political environment that seems to permeate the country right now, it's no good for anybody.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I don't know what the heck is going on, but geez. Like, it's like, that's not conflict. That's just ignorance. Like conflict, like you don't avoid conflict because, I mean, people want to avoid conflict because they think, oh, it turns into this ugliness where you're stupid or I'm stupid and I hate you and you hate me and blah, blah, blah. Like they think that's what conflict is. So they avoid it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what it always degrades into these days anyway. But really, conflict is something that you learn to manage, because we all have conflicting ideas about something. Does that mean that we have to hate each other?
Yeah, because the way to the way to navigate conflict is conflict management, not avoidance.
Right. It's understanding why the other person thinks what they think, and giving them a chance to understand why you think the way you think. And maybe they'll change their mind after talking to you. Maybe you'll change it, but you've got to be open to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Need more of that. So good on you. What a really interesting position that you're in.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll like write a book about your experiences and conflict management, being in that unique political situation where you're at now.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
I've thought about
it.
I thought about what it'd be like to write a book someday. That's like, that's on the bucket list.
That's the book we need.
All right. Okay.
Fascinating. So then you're about halfway through, and it sounds like sort of the idea, and you said that you wanted to apply to do this again. You want to be a fellow again.
Yeah. So the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, they also run an executive fellowship program, and that one cuts out the sponsoring society portion. So the executive branch, so like the legislative branch would be either the U.S. House of Representatives or Senate. I'm going back to the Schoolhouse Rock. The executive branch would be any agency, or a department. So the ones that are probably most familiar, like FDA, USDA, Department of Homeland Security, we mentioned, or FEMA, like that's an agency. And then I was mentioning Food Safety Inspection Service, that's part of USDA, et cetera. So this fellowship would put you in any one of those agencies. And so I guess I forget exactly what you asked, but yeah, I am currently applying to join the executive branch as a fellow. And that would be, so the nice thing is the timing lines up such that like day one of the next fellowship would come after the last day of this one, because it's the same organizing group.
Sweet. And then, but who will be paying for you at that point?
So that would be AAAS.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, most of the time. Sometimes it comes out of government budgets. But that, like, I don't need to get into the weeds.
Okay, but you will have a salary. Somebody will be paying it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And then so, during this time that you're in DC, you're making connections and you're learning about all these issues. And, I guess this is your opportunity to plot your way forward after you finish your fellowships.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas about what you might like to end up doing? You said you weren't planning on staying in DC.
Right. Yeah. I have two areas that I feel really strongly about, and I'm probably find a way to spend time on both. And I don't know exactly like which one will be professional and which one will be more volunteer, or I haven't, figured out how all the pieces fit. But I would like to stay professionally involved in One Health policy. So One Health would be the intersection of animal, human, and environmental health. I mentioned earlier I'm getting a master's in public health.
Yes, you did.
So my interests there are things like antimicrobial resistance, infectious disease, zoonotic disease, food insecurity, things in that things in that area. And then I also, probably not surprising based on how much I've talked about it, am really interested in mental health, especially within the veterinary profession. And so I don't know, like that could look like working, like being a counselor at a veterinary school, and that would take more training. And that's not like, I'm not making moves to get that training or anything. So that's just like brainstorming more than like a target right now. It could be like volunteering and living near a vet school and like trying to stay involved that way. It could be trying to get involved in a study, like I mentioned earlier, like if there's one happening, seeing if I can pitch in, or if there's not, then it would be a bigger project, but to start that study.
Or maybe there's an AVMA committee that's specifically dedicated to mental health and veterinary.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there is. Didn't they just start one?
Well, they just hired a full-time like wellness and diversity staff member. And I don't know the name of the committee off the top of my head, but yeah, there are certainly volunteer opportunities at that level. I just on Facebook a couple weeks ago started a support group for people who didn't pass the NAVLE. And so that's been a really great way to stay involved in like trying to help the next generation of the profession, like, deal with a problem that is, I think, a lot more common than we talk about. But the whole reason why it's not common is because we don't talk about it. Like, what like the end of the sentence. It's
right.
And so trying to remove that stigma. And I know I had a conversation with somebody last year. This was a romantic partner of a veterinarian, but somebody who was not, like, hadn't gone through veterinary school, or wasn't like professionally involved in the community. And this person said, you guys talk a lot about mental health, but you don't really do much. And I kind of meditated on that. And one of my reactions is, well, if you subscribe to the theory that like thought produces words, produces actions, then like you have to
talk about it first,
think about it, and then you have to talk about it, and I think we're good at talking about it. I think we're pretty decent at that number 2 intermediary phase, or getting better anyway. I mean, back from when I started, like before I started vet school, and to where I am now, I think that's only 5 years. And I in that time, so AVMA just hired a full-time staff person. SAVMA started a wellness committee. That there's this annual Vet Med United Day in April, where the students from each school, they do like a big, like, entire student body engages in a wellness activity and a sport activity. And so that's one of my reflections, is like, okay, it might not look like we're doing a lot, but we're taking the steps towards doing things. And the other part of me, like, also feels inclined to agree with that. Like there does seem to be a void in terms of like when it does become more acceptable to talk about it, then the need almost becomes, it feels like more urgent, and it feels like there's this like, we're probably at this point, like pre-tipping point, where we are still, like, we're still in this culture of vet med and vet school that leads to us having higher rates of depression and suicide than our counterparts in other professions. And we talk about it more than we used to. So it's like, it probably, it might look to an outsider, like if they just happen to read an article that says that, then they might think like, what are you guys doing about it? Like, if if you can recognize the problem, then how come nothing's happening? Especially if you were like the significant other of a veterinarian. So I recognize that there's like an increased awareness to like recognize this, and there seems to be like people that want to talk about it. And when I started this group for people who hadn't taken the NAVLE, I also got, or hadn't passed the NAVLE, I got messages from several people who, total strangers, who said, hey, I'm not messaging you because I didn't pass the NAVLE. I have a different challenge that I'm going through, and I don't know what to do, but it seemed like you might know what to do, or you might be able to help me. And that was really eye-opening. Like, did not expect that outcome at all from kind of like polling the internet. And so it just like, it becomes more and more obvious to me that the vet med community needs more people who want to be the change they want to see in terms of mental health culture. So I want to do that. And I don't know if that's professional or if that's something I do volunteer. And this is a theme that I mentioned earlier, but to me, it's all about the people that I work with. And so if I find like, knowing who I am and knowing myself, like if I find if this fellowship works out and the application, goes well, and it feels like I find a good fit in the executive branch, I'll probably take it because that's what's in front of me right now. And I know that's professionally interesting and stimulating enough for me to try out. And I know that work-life balance, like that job will be 9 to 5, and it will give me time and space to take care of myself and pursue other interests outside of that 9 to 5. And so, like, all things considered, I know that would let me keep exploring the avenues that I want to. And if it didn't work, then I would like find a way to maybe get involved in, like go work at a vet school or something, or try to work with ADMA or something on like student outreach activities.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And are your MPH that you're working on now, are you doing that online?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Through what online program?
So that's through University of Illinois, Chicago. And it's the joint program with the vet school down in Urbana. So it was online all throughout vet school too. I started it second semester, first year.
Oh, okay.
Just kind of like chipping away one course here, course there.
Yeah. So I mean, I like the idea of doing it after vet school. Vet school is enough.
Yeah.
But yeah. So it's all 100% online. You don't have to travel anywhere.
Correct.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I think maybe I'll see if I can put like a link to that in the show notes too, because I know there's a lot of clinical veterinarians who are interested also in looking into non-clinical paths. But I mean, I don't even think you absolutely have to have an MPH in order to, follow this path.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Holland, do you have any last words of advice you'd like to offer future veterinarians?
So I made some notes beforehand. I starred support system, and I know I touched on that a bit. I think I was really fortunate. I think I've been fortunate my entire life, and I have just started to realize this recently. Like the last time I went home for the holidays, so this was like 2 months ago. Just how deep my family had set up a support system for me, and how important that is, and how much I had been taking advantage of it. But reading about like what causes people to think about suicide and then act on that thought, one of the most common underlying themes is like feeling alone, and like not feeling, just feeling like, well, there's no one that can help me, and B, like no one's gonna miss me if I'm gone, because like I just don't really have a circle, and like it's probably just gonna be better for everybody if I just remove myself and like stop being a burden. And I'm not that close with anyone anyway, so it probably won't be terribly upsetting to other people. And like, I've never had that thought because I've always had an insane number of people that reach out to me. Like when I wrote a Facebook post when I said that I was moving to DC, and like a bunch of my parents' friends who had kids or friends who lived in DC reached out to me, and like who I hadn't heard from in years. But like, I don't think everybody has that. I don't think everybody has like people tuned in to you all the time. And like, I always had people checking in on me at school, and that is really important. And if like, it's kind of like sleep. How I said, I actually feel like I did handle sleep well. The support system, I would just add, like, I would tweak that statement. I don't think I handled it well. I think it was in place for me without me realizing it, and realizing how important it was and how invaluable that was. But yeah, that would be like a huge reminder to anybody applying to vet school would be like, know your support system and nurture it, and like make sure it's
maintain it.
It's there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that depression it gets a lot of energy from feeling alone and isolated. It's so easy to feel that way in veterinary school and after veterinary school too. I mean, in vet school, you're surrounded by all these people who are like your colleagues or your future colleagues. And then after vet school, you're just out in the world, so
Yeah.
isolation is something that is a danger, I think, to veterinarians in particular.
Yeah, you said it really well there. It being alone feeds depression.
Mm-hmm,
Totally agree. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, know who your support system is. If you don't have one, start developing one. Start making friends. And of course, it's not a one-way street. They're not just there for you, but develop some deep relationships, because our brains are evolved to be social. And I think that I've noticed, I moved to Flagstaff for my husband's job, and I don't know anybody here. And I've noticed that my sense of anxiety has increased simply because I'm so isolated, because we need to be social with other human beings. And I honestly, I think this is a big part of a lot of the anxiety and depression that we're dealing with.
I do too. And I think it's a little bit of what I mentioned earlier, the typical personality profile or emotional intelligence profile of a veterinary student or veterinarian is to place the needs of others before your own. And that personality trait can make you an incredible caretaker, an incredible doctor. And it can also, at least when that's overdone, it can turn into a weakness and a debilitating weakness. And so having that support system, it's helpful to have that in vet school, especially because the support system is likely going to be made up of people who are putting others' needs before their own. And so the bigger that support system is, the more often you're going to have someone who's like paying attention enough to realize who needs help in a certain moment. It's really important to have. Yeah.
And also, I just want to say, like, if you're really close to somebody, that there are people that care about you, then when you start thinking of suicide, you have to take into consideration how much you will hurt those other people, how much pain, and that they will bear that for the rest of their lives. And I think that having those close relationships may be a stopgap if you think, maybe you don't want to be here anymore. That's what you're feeling right now. Okay. You might not feel that a week from now. So, but an extra help in not actually going through with it is remembering these people that love you and how much you will hurt them.
Yeah.
That you will create an emotional scar in their lives that will never go away.
Yeah.
And so having that social network also makes you feel like there are other people depending on you too.
Yeah, so I'll say when I said I took that break during rotations, that 2-week break during fourth year, I remember feeling like so the words you just mentioned, like I didn't want to be here, but because of the support system I had, like the closest I could get to picturing that was like getting hit by a car on accident. It did not look like intentional. And so I think the support system prevented that. I think it prevented me from thinking like, well, how do I like actionably make myself disappear instead of like, I wish I get hit by a car. Cause like, there's a really big difference between those two things.
Yeah.
And it was still heavy enough to feel that, you know, to feel the less serious version of that. It was still heavy enough for me to like need to like seriously take a break and put things in order.
Okay. So definitely future vet students develop a support system, maintain it.
Yeah. And on that thread, I remember I called the person who would ultimately have the final decision on that at Illinois. And I remember having a lot of anxiety about that call because this was a person who was not seen as approachable amongst the vet students. And we didn't think this person was necessarily like gonna like do the best for student wellness. But it turned out the response was overwhelmingly supportive. And like, it made me wish I would have said something sooner.
What is this phone call that you made?
Oh, a phone call to, I keep using vague language because I don't want to identify the person at Illinois.
Oh, okay.
It was an administrative staff person at Illinois who would ultimately like let me take a break from rotations or not.
Oh, I see.
But they said, take as long as you need. Like if you need to take 6 weeks off, we'll make it happen. Like whatever you need in this moment to like make sure you're fine, we will structure the rest around that. And that response made me wish I would have said something sooner because maybe it wouldn't have gotten to the point where I needed an emergency break. And so, yeah, just to like get it out there and remove the stigma.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? That's a good point because especially in fourth year, those clinical rotations are happening all year round, all the time. So it's not like, I don't know, anatomy lab, first semester anatomy lab, which only happens first semester, once a year in the first year of vet school, but especially in clinical rotations. And I found clinical rotations particularly stressful. Like the hours were even more than what I was studying before. And I was always at the hospital. So, but you can, and my father actually had a massive stroke when I was in fourth year, and I didn't, but I could have taken a rotation off. And all it would have meant was coming back and doing that rotation later. Like I said, they're going all year round, so you can just step right back in where you stepped out. And then either your school allows you to walk on stage and graduate with your class, like for show, or they don't, and you do it with the class next year. Like, who cares?
Yeah. I mean, who cares when the alternative is declining mental health? Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer at that point. But yeah, and I found the added benefit of, so I did ultimately end up finishing rotations with the class of 2018 instead of my class. But of course they asked like, why are you here? What's the deal? And so I, explained everything, and that was really helpful. They were like, oh wait, you can like take a break if you need to. Cause I know I just started rotations, but I'm feeling underwater. And like, I got to feel got to use my experience to help other people maybe prevent a bad experience of their own. That felt great.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could have been like, oh, I'm too embarrassed and I'm going to like make up something, I had a sick family member or something, and kept it to yourself. And that would have just reinforced your feeling of shame.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have helped anybody. Whereas you were courageous enough to say, this is what happened. And it helped all those people because we're all feeling the same way on the inside. Just some of us aren't, ready to say it out loud.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember thinking like, man, they're all going to think I'm like, the dumbest person of the class that just graduated. And like, this is going to be really hard. But I have friends from those conversations that, it was like, wait, like you're in the secret club of like not sticking the landing in veterinary school. And I was like, everybody's in that club.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good on you.
It was a good reminder.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Holland, for your time. I really enjoyed this, and I've learned so much from it. It's really fascinating. As a small way of thanking you, I'd like to ask, is there any favorite charity that you'd like to mention, tell people about?
Yeah. A very close friend of mine who stood up, well, she and her husband stood up in our wedding, leads a, a nonprofit in Chicago called Healing to Action. And they advance a worker-led movement to end gender violence. And they envision worker leaders creating safe and just workplaces for stable economic futures. And I would recommend anybody donate to a mission like that, but especially because it's a very dear friend of mine who is she's also taking a leap and like starting her own business, and so she needs some support there too. So
she started her own nonprofit.
Yeah, Healing to Action.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll put a link to the website then in the show notes as well. Healing to Action. That sounds great. Again, Dr. Holland, thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. And good luck on your application for the Executive Fellowship.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me. It's been great.